We thought our sleepover game of hide-and-seek was harmless fun, until a fifth voice started counting with us, and there were only 4 of us in the house. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, and if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The house was alive that night, though none of us wanted to admit it. It was supposed to be an ordinary sleepover, just 4 friends sprawled across the living room floor, whispering secrets and sharing popcorn while the glow of a single lamp painted our faces gold. But even as we laughed, there was a strange heaviness in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. The shadows seemed too long, too sharp, stretching across the walls as if they were reaching for us. Every creak of the wooden floorboards sounded less like settling wood and more like footsteps trying very hard not to be heard. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it. The faintest sound beneath the hum of the ceiling fan, breathing, slow, deliberate, and definitely not belonging to anyone in the room. My heart stumbled in my chest, but I forced a grin when my friend Tessa suggested we play hide-and-seek to shake off the weird vibes. It was nearly midnight, the perfect hour for childish games mixed with the thrill of fear. None of us knew then how dangerous that decision would be. I volunteered to count first, pressing my palms over my eyes and counting backward from 20. The room went silent, except for the distant sound of running feet. When I opened my eyes, the house seemed impossibly larger, every shadow deeper and more secretive. I searched the kitchen, the hallway, even the bathroom, calling out to my friends with a playful lilt. That's when I noticed something strange, faint footprints in the dust near the back door. Bare footprints. None of us were barefoot. The game took on a different tone after that. My breaths came shallow as I crept toward the stairs, the wooden steps groaning like an old man's joints beneath my weight. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard popped loudly. I froze. I wanted to call out, to demand that everyone come back to the living room, but my throat locked up. It was as if the house was listening, daring me to make a sound. I pushed forward, my phone flashlight slicing through the darkness. Each bedroom I checked was empty, the beds neatly made, the closets yawning open like mouths ready to swallow me whole. Yet each time I turned to leave, I swore I saw movement in my peripheral vision, a darting shadow, a shifting silhouette. It felt less like I was searching for my friends, and more like something was searching for me. Finally, I reached the narrow door to the attic. A cold draft slid down the staircase like a ghostly exhale. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back, but curiosity gnawed at me. Slowly, I pushed the door open, the hinges crying out in protest. The attic smelled of old wood and mildew, and in the beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something that froze my blood. 5 shapes crouched in the corner. 4 of them were my friends, wide-eyed and trembling. The 5th was smiling. Before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me, and in the darkness, a voice whispered my name. The whisper curled around me like smoke, thin and cold, sliding straight into my bones. My friends scrambled backward, their faces pale with terror, pressing against the slanted walls of the attic as though they could melt into them. The 5th figure didn't move. It stayed crouched low, its head tilted in a way no human head should tilt, like a broken marionette dangling from invisible strings. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam jittering across its face, or what should have been a face, for a heartbeat. There was only silence, the kind of silence that makes you question if the world itself has stopped. Then it shifted forward. The motion was wrong, jerky, like a video buffering on bad internet. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot by a primitive fear older than language. Behind me, the doorknob rattled violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to get in, though I knew the door had already locked from the inside. Tessa, I croaked, finally finding my voice. What is that? Tessa shook her head frantically, tears streaking down her cheeks. We don't know. It wasn't here when we hid, it just appeared. My mind raced, grasping for logic, for anything that could make sense of this nightmare. Maybe it was a prank, some twisted joke gone too far. But then the thing opened its mouth. No sound came out, only a deep, rasping breath that matched the one I'd heard earlier beneath the ceiling fan's hum. It wasn't playing with us. It had been watching. The attic's air grew colder, thick and damp like the inside of a cave. My breath came out in white puffs and my skin prickled with goosebumps. The thing began to laugh, but it was a sound with no joy, a broken, wet chuckle that seemed to scrape the inside of my ears. I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just mimicking laughter. It was mimicking us. Bits of our voices, our giggles, stitched together into something monstrous. Suddenly, the attic light bulb flickered on, blinding us for a split second. When my vision cleared, the thing was gone. My friends huddled closer to me, sobbing. For one wild moment, I thought we were safe until I saw the footprints. A fresh trail of wet, bare footprints leading straight across the attic floor and stopping just inches behind where I stood. Panic surged through me. I lunged for the door, slamming my shoulder into it again and again until the old wood splintered and burst open. We tumbled down the narrow staircase, half running, half falling, until we spilled into the living room. The house was eerily silent again, as though none of it had ever happened. But then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The sleeping bags were arranged neatly, like no one had ever left them. 4 perfect, undisturbed cocoons. My heart stuttered. We had all been upstairs. So who or what was still down here? Behind me, the creak of a door opening split the silence, and a familiar, rasping breath filled the room. The house had a language of its own. Every creak of its ancient wooden beams sounded like a half-forgotten word, every groan of the pipes like a sigh trapped for decades. We thought it was charming at first, the way old houses tend to be, full of personality, full of history. My friends and I sprawled across the faded rug in the living room, half buried in blankets and snacks, laughing each time a board popped under our weight. It was supposed to be a harmless weekend getaway, a chance to unplug from the world and just be kids again, free from buzzing phones and demanding parents. The first sound came around midnight. A soft, rhythmic creaking in the hallway, as though someone were walking slowly back and forth. At first we laughed, tossing out theories like Scooby-Doo villains, ghosts, burglars, maybe even a sleepwalking neighbor. Tessa cupped her hands and called out into the darkness, "Who's there?" Her voice carried down the hall, echoing faintly. We waited, breath held, for a moment of silence. Then the echo came back, perfectly mimicking her words, but delayed, as though whoever or whatever was answering needed an extra heartbeat to think. We laughed again, though this time it felt forced, like pressing a smile into a cracked mask. "Old houses are weird," I said, pretending to be rational, though goosebumps already lined my arms. But then it happened again. This time Max shouted something random, "Pizza!" And from the hall, the same voice came back, softer, almost playful. Pizza. My heart pounded as if I'd been running. Echoes don't form perfect words, not like that. They distort, blur, stretch. This was deliberate, intelligent. It felt like something hiding in the dark was learning our language one word at a time. Curiosity battled fear, and as usual, curiosity won. We decided to test it. Max grabbed his phone and set it to record while Tessa whispered a phrase into the hall. "We can hear you." We waited. A pause stretched so long it felt like an eternity, and then softly came the same words. But there was an extra hiss, a breath before the final syllable, like whoever spoke wasn't quite human. We huddled together to replay the recording. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. On the screen, the waveform was jagged, irregular. Not just an echo. Something was really speaking back. "That's impossible," Max muttered, though his shaking hands betrayed his disbelief. We whispered theories, hidden speakers, someone playing a trick on us, even a parrot, but none made sense. The voice had been exactly Tessa's. Same pitch, same inflection, down to the nervous tremor in her tone. As we argued, the house seemed to lean closer, listening. The creaks became sharper, more precise, as though footsteps were circling us from every direction. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching like spilled ink, and then, from the hallway, came a whisper so faint it felt like it crawled inside my ear rather than through it. One single word, my name. Spoken perfectly, I froze. My friends turned to me wide-eyed, pale, but here's the thing that chilled my blood more than anything else. When I opened my mouth to ask who had said it, Every single one of them swore they'd heard a different name. Tessa swore she'd heard Max's name. Max insisted it had been mine, and Jenna trembled, claiming it whispered hers. Our voices overlapped, a storm of panic and disbelief, until I realized something terrifying. The house was silent again. No creaks, no echoes, just an unnatural stillness like the pause before a predator pounces. It felt as if the entire building was holding its breath, listening. I swallowed hard and forced myself to think. My dad once told me fear was like quicksand. The more you thrash, the deeper you sink. We need proof, I whispered. Something concrete. My voice sounded foreign to me, too thin and shaky to inspire confidence. Still, it gave us a purpose. Max, always the tech geek, set up his phone on a makeshift tripod of stacked books, its tiny camera aimed directly at the hallway. Tessa scribbled notes with trembling hands, writing down the exact times we heard the voice. It was an act of control, a desperate attempt to bring logic to a situation that defied it. We decided to repeat the experiment. Jenna was chosen to speak this time, her voice barely more than a breath as she said, "Hello. Who are you?" The darkness seemed to drink in her words. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then the reply came, not just a repeat, but a subtle change. The same sentence, but with a whispering emphasis on the last two words, as if correcting her. "Who are you?" My stomach dropped. That wasn't a mindless echo. That was a question. It was interacting with us. Tessa's pen clattered to the floor. "It's learning," she choked out. "It's actually learning." The realization hung heavy in the air, thick as smoke. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Ventriloquism, hidden microphones, even some bizarre neurological phenomenon like auditory pareidolia, but none fit. The precision of that voice was too perfect, too deliberate. Max grabbed his phone, frantically rewinding the footage. The screen showed us huddled together, pale and trembling, but in the background, the hallway looked darker than before, as if the shadows were bleeding outward. And then, for just a fraction of a second, a shape appeared. Thin, elongated, almost human but not quite, standing perfectly still in the corner where no one had been. My breath caught in my throat. We didn't speak for several minutes. Even Jenna's sobs were silent, swallowed by the oppressive air. Finally, Max whispered, "We should leave." It was the obvious answer, but even as he said it, I knew it was too late. This thing, whatever it was, had already hooked itself into us, like a tick burrowing beneath skin. From the hallway came a sudden burst of sound, not a single voice, but all of our voices, overlapping in a perfect, horrifying harmony. Laughter, screams, random words we'd spoken throughout the night, jumbled together like a twisted symphony. It was playing with us, showing us how well it knew us. Then, as abruptly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence fell again, heavier than before, and in that suffocating quiet, a single word emerged, spoken in a voice so perfect, so intimate, that it felt like it had been pulled directly from my own thoughts. My name. But when I spun around, desperate to see who had said it, my friends were already staring at me in terror. They claimed they hadn't heard my name at all. Only theirs. The idea started as a joke, the kind of late-night challenge that seems harmless under the warm glow of a lamp and the nervous energy of a sleepover. My friend Mariah claimed she'd read about an old ritual online, a game called The Reflection, where you try to summon a spirit through a mirror. It sounded ridiculous, like an urban legend teenagers pass around for thrills. But in that darkened living room, surrounded by half-empty soda cans and the hum of the heater, it felt just dangerous enough to be exciting. Curiosity is a seductive thing, especially when fear makes it taste sweeter. The rules were simple. Lights off, one candle burning, everyone seated in front of a mirror. You stare at your own reflection and chant a series of words 3 times, inviting whoever lingers to step forward. We laughed as we arranged ourselves on the floor, knees touching, the mirror propped against the wall like a doorway we weren't sure we wanted to open. The flickering candlelight warped our features, stretching our smiles into something grotesque. It was silly, until it wasn't. On the 3rd chant, the room seemed to inhale. The flame leaned sharply to one side as if an unseen breath had passed over it. None of us spoke, too startled to break the moment. I kept my eyes fixed on my reflection, telling myself it was just adrenaline. But then I noticed something strange. When I blinked, the reflection didn't blink with me. It stayed perfectly still, a millisecond too long, before catching up. My stomach dropped. "Did anyone else see that?" I whispered. My voice felt like a stone tossed into a still pond, rippling through the silence. The others shifted uneasily, but no one admitted it. Then Mariah giggled nervously, trying to cut the tension. Her reflection, however, didn't giggle. It smiled. A slow, deliberate curl of lips that didn't match the fear on her real face. We bolted upright, panic crackling through the group like static electricity. Jenna wanted to stop the game immediately, but my curiosity clawed past my fear. I needed to understand what was happening. My brain, wired for logic, began searching for explanations, optical illusions, tricks of light, even collective hysteria. I grabbed my phone and set it to record, determined to capture evidence. We tried again, this time carefully observing every movement. I counted aloud, timing our blinks with a stopwatch. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, just as the timer hit 30 seconds, something shifted. The reflections behind us began to lag. Fractional delays at first, then entire movements out of sync. It was like watching a video with a glitching frame rate, reality stuttering. And then we saw it. Between Mariah and Jenna's reflected shoulders, a shape emerged. Taller than either of them, with elongated limbs and a face blurred like smeared paint. It stood perfectly still, yet the air around it seemed to ripple. My rational mind screamed it couldn't be real, but the camera confirmed it. There was an extra figure in the reflection. The candle flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. My heart hammered as Jenna reached toward the mirror, perhaps to touch it, perhaps to push it away. That was when the reflection smiled. Not Mariah's, not Jenna's, but the thing's. A grin wide and hollow, stretching too far, and then the glass began to crack. The sound was deafening in the silence, a spiderweb of fractures racing across the surface like ice splintering on a frozen lake. We stumbled backward, shielding our faces as shards rained down onto the floor. The candle went out in the chaos, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. No light, no movement, just the frantic pounding of our hearts. Then I realized the darkness wasn't complete. A faint glow shimmered from the corner of the room, pale and cold, like moonlight leaking through a crack that shouldn't exist. My breath caught in my throat. As my eyes adjusted, the shape emerged, no longer trapped in glass, no longer bound by reflection. It stood in our world now, its elongated form bending in unnatural angles, head tilting slowly as though testing the limits of a new body. Behind me, Mariah whimpered, the sound barely louder than a breath. I wanted to run, to flee into the night and never look back, but my legs refused to obey. Some primitive part of me knew that sudden movement would make me prey. The thing moved closer, its steps utterly silent, like a film reel missing its audio. As it approached, a strange rhythmic clicking filled the room, and I realized it wasn't sound at all. It was coming from inside my head, echoing in perfect sync with my own racing heartbeat. In desperation, I fumbled for my phone. The screen's glow cast a small circle of light, illuminating the wreckage of the mirror. My reflection stared back at me from the shards, but there was something wrong. In every fragment, my image was slightly different. In one piece, my eyes were closed when they were open in reality. In another, my mouth stretched into a smile I wasn't making. It was as if the mirror had captured multiple versions of me, scattered like broken timelines. Mariah's voice trembled as she tried to reason with it. "We didn't mean to call you. We'll stop the game. Please, just go back." But the thing didn't retreat. Instead, it crouched low, its movements jerky and stuttered, like a puppet tangled in invisible strings. Slowly, it raised one impossibly long finger and pointed directly at me. The clicking in my head grew louder, almost deafening now. Flashes of images surged through my mind. The game, the chance, the exact moment the reflection smiled. It wasn't random. It was a ritual, precise and mathematical. We hadn't just summoned something, we'd freed it. Suddenly, every shard of glass on the floor began to tremble, vibrating like tuning forks. The pieces lifted into the air, swirling around us in a cyclone of silver light. For a fleeting second, I thought they might reassemble into the mirror, trapping the creature again. Instead, they formed a perfect circle at its feet. A doorway, a boundary, a claim. The creature stepped over the circle, and the glass fell still. I turned to scream for my friends, but they were frozen, eyes wide, pupils dilated, as if held by invisible strings. Behind me, the thing exhaled for the first time, a sound like wind through a crypt. And in the corner of the room, lit by the dying glow to feel safe, warm light spilling from the kitchen, the soft murmur of whispered jokes, and the comforting closeness of friends breathing beside you as the night drifts on. That's how it started. 4 of us curled up in sleeping bags on the floor of Tessa's old lake house, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and marshmallows. Outside, the wind rattled the trees like restless bones, but inside, we were a fortress of laughter and stories. By midnight, one by one, our voices faded into silence, swallowed by sleep. The last thing I remember before drifting off was hearing Mariah's soft, steady snore. It was oddly comforting, like a metronome anchoring us to normalcy. She'd always been the first to fall asleep, cocooned so tightly in her blanket she resembled a silkworm. I smiled in the dark and closed my eyes, never imagining that, hours later, that same sound would vanish, and with it, my sense of safety. I woke with a start sometime after 3 a.m., my mouth dry, my mind caught between dream and reality. The room was icy, the kind of cold that feels almost deliberate, as though someone had opened a door to let it in. At first I couldn't pinpoint what had disturbed me. The others lay still in their bags, shadows rising and falling with each slow breath. And then I saw her. Mariah was standing at the foot of my makeshift bed, perfectly still. Her eyes were wide open, reflecting the moonlight that bled through the curtains. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Mariah. My whisper trembled in the silence. No response. I tried again, louder this time, my heart hammering against my ribs. Still nothing. It felt like staring at a wax figure brought to life. Too human, yet not human enough. I sat up slowly, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The other girls stirred awake, groggy and confused. When Jenna finally snapped on a flashlight, the beam landed squarely on Mariah's face. She didn't flinch. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing nearly all of the color. Her lips were parted just enough to reveal a sliver of teeth. Tessa scrambled out of her bag and grabbed Mariah by the shoulders, shaking her violently. "Wake up, you're scaring us!" And just like that, it was over. Mariah gasped, eyes fluttering, and collapsed into Tessa's arms. She looked around wildly, terrified and disoriented. "What's going on?" "Why are you yelling?" "You were sleepwalking," Jenna said, though her voice cracked with disbelief. But Mariah shook her head furiously. "No, I haven't moved. I've been asleep this whole time." We turned toward her sleeping bag. It lay zipped and perfectly undisturbed, the fabric still holding the shape of a body inside. My skin prickled with cold, my thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. None of us dared to sleep again. When dawn finally arrived, we stumbled outside for fresh air. That's when Tessa saw them. 2 sets of footprints in the frost. One led from the porch into the woods, the other led back, but stopped halfway to the door. We stared at the trail like it might blink and fix itself, each print scalloped in thin frost, toes crisp, arches darker where warmth had kissed the ice. Nothing explained why one path ended mid-yard, as if whatever came back decided not to finish being human. Tessa wanted to follow the prints. Curiosity rose in me like a flare. But what none of us expected was how fast that flare would burn into fear. We moved single file, the lake house shrinking behind us. The trees held last night's cold, bark glittering, and the air tasted metallic. Each footprint ahead was precise, heel, ball, toes, no drag. It didn't look like sleepwalking, it looked like purpose. I kept thinking of Mariah's pupils, dark as ponds at midnight. The path led to a stand of birch where the world thinned. There the stride lengthened, as if someone had decided the answer lay deeper. In the clearing, the frost was disturbed in a perfect oval. No prints within, only a smooth depression, like someone had stood very still and then lifted straight up. Birds chattered overhead, mechanical as a recorder. Evidence wants a narrative, I told myself, but the oval stayed a blank page. We turned back to study the returning prints that stopped halfway. I knelt by the last one and held my hand over it. Cold radiated from the shallow depression, as if the ground remembered a temperature that didn't belong to the day. Jenna fetched a yardstick and we measured stride, toe angle, depth. The numbers said Mariah, but the feeling said something wearing Mariah. Like a fading lantern, our confidence guttered and flared. Inside, we compared timelines. I had woken at 3:07. The air turned frigid at 3:08, the flashlight at 3:09. Mariah insisted she'd never left her bag, and her face carried the bewildered ache of being accused by your own body. She rubbed her wrists as if erasing invisible fingers. If this was sleepwalking, it had choreography. If it was a prank, it had physics. We set a chair at the threshold where the second track ended, half outside, half in, like a question leaning on the porch. Mariah sat in her sleeping bag, braid tight as if to tether her. A bowl of warm water at her feet, a cheap compass on the step, my phone on voice memo. For a minute, nothing. Then the compass ticked and held. The water rippled once, though the air was still. "Come back," Mariah whispered, coaxing a stray cat. The wind replied with a leaf skitter. What we didn't expect was the footprint. Not a new one ahead, but the last print deepening, as if filled from below. My phone caught a sound like breath through cloth. The bowl exhaled a thread of steam, and the sleeping bag loosened at her shoulders. I blinked, and she was still in the chair, yet also not. Her outline slid 2 inches to the left, like a picture nudged in its frame. The air where she'd been a heartbeat before stung with cold. We lurched forward, hands out to seize her back from whatever overlapped us. That was when I saw the wet half-moon on the plank by my boot, the print of a bare heel, facing inward from nowhere. And it was warming. It started as nothing more than a game. Tessa's parents had left an old baby monitor in the attic, a relic from when her little brother was a toddler. We dug it out, half covered in dust, thinking it would be funny to use as a makeshift walkie-talkie during our sleepover. The device was cracked along one side, its plastic yellowed with age. But when we clicked it on, the tiny green light blinked to life like a single unblinking eye. It felt strangely alive in my hand, buzzing faintly with static. We tuned it to a dead channel, expecting the satisfying hiss of empty air. Instead, we got silence, a thick, oppressive quiet that felt heavier than noise. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, each thud painfully loud in your ears. Then, very faintly, came a whisper. At first, we couldn't make out the words. It sounded like 100 voices speaking at once, layered so deeply they became nothing more than a breathy hum. We huddled closer, giggling nervously, assuming it was interference from another house. But then the whisper sharpened into clarity, and our laughter died in an instant. She's leaning against the window, every head turned toward Jenna. She froze, her hand still resting on the cold glass pane exactly as described. The voice hadn't been guessing. It had been observing. Tessa snatched the monitor from me, her face pale. "It's probably some kind of feedback loop," she said, though her tone betrayed her doubt. "Maybe there's a neighbor on the same frequency." But as we listened, the whispers continued, narrating our movements in real time. "He's sitting down." Max had just dropped onto the couch. "She's biting her lip." Jenna's teeth froze mid-nervous nibble. The words were exact, precise, like a running commentary of our lives. I wanted to believe it was a prank, but something about the voice didn't fit. It wasn't quite human. Each syllable stretched unnaturally, as though being spoken through water. Still, logic clung to me like a life raft. Determined to prove this had a rational explanation, I suggested we test it scientifically. We moved to different rooms, one person staying with the monitor while the others scattered. Max counted down from 3, then raised his hand silently in the kitchen. A second later, the whisper reported. He raised his hand. It shouldn't have been possible. No sound, no movement, yet the monitor knew. Panic prickled at the edges of my thoughts, but we kept going, switching channels, adjusting frequencies. With each change, the voice grew sharper, closer. It began speaking faster, almost eager, as if it enjoyed being heard. And then it stopped describing what we were doing. It started describing what we were about to do. "She will drop the cup." A heartbeat later, Jenna gasped as the mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the tile. My mouth went dry. The monitor buzzed louder, like a swarm of unseen insects. The last thing it whispered before the static roared back was a phrase that froze me in place. Every impulse in my spine begged me to, an itch you can't scratch. But I locked my gaze on the baby monitor's tiny green eye and pretended it was all that existed. The others stood frozen, our reflections faint in the dark window. The static throbbed with a pulse, a mechanical heartbeat, and the whisper bled through again, closer. We needed data. Fear makes superstition easy, but evidence builds a bridge. I opened my phone's camera and hit record, propping it against a stack of coasters so it faced the room and the hallway beyond. Max lifted the receiver, easing the volume to a sliver. The house settled around us like a sleeping animal. But none of us expected the way the voice changed when it realized it was being filmed. It became articulate. The syllables snapped into place like bones setting in a cast. It described the dust on the mantel, the hair elastic on Tessa's wrist, the thin white scratch on my thumb from last week. Details felt like fingerprints in the air. Logic said we were picking up someone nearby, but the information was too intimate, as if the source lived behind my eyes. We split up again, narrating timestamps, moving like chess pieces. I went to the hallway, passing family photos turned sepia. The carpet pressed a cold pattern into my feet. A smile you could hear floated from the speaker, the softness people use when they already know the ending. It began counting down to things that hadn't happened yet. Jenna would cough at 10. Tessa would drop the spoon at 5. Max would open the closet at 3. Each prediction landed with surgical precision, the world a metronome ticking toward inevitability. Anxiety skittered over my skin like static cling. I tried a different frequency, then another, stepping through channels as if through doors in a hotel. But every door led to the same room, and the voice was in the chair. The monitor hissed, then offered a new test. It told us which lights we would turn on, which drawers we would open, which words I would say next. I refused to speak. The next whisper was amusement, and then it spoke the sentence anyway, matching the rhythm my tongue hadn't used yet. The future felt pre-recorded, coded like a forgotten map beneath the paint. We needed a Faraday cage, copper mesh, anything to choke the signal. With nothing handy, we improvised. Pots overturned, foil wrapped around the receiver like a crude chrysalis. The sound threaded through, unhindered, silk through fingers. The voice grew tender, almost consoling. It didn't need wires. It didn't need walls. The green light brightened. The whisper leaned into a hush that felt like breath on my neck. It told me to turn around. It told me I already had. The camera's lens reflected a figure in the hallway, taller than the door frame. Head inclined as if listening to a seashell. The monitor said one last thing. It asked me not to look. I did. The phone slipped from my hand, struck the floor and spun. The image smeared into a whirl of ceiling and feet and doorway. And then sound reached us. The kind of scream that makes the house choose a side. My cousin's house had always felt slightly wrong, like a place built with one brick out of place. It wasn't haunted in the dramatic movie-like way, no cold spots, no shadowy figures, but there was a subtle tension woven into its bones. Hallways stretched just a little too long, and the wallpaper seemed to ripple faintly in certain lights. During sleepovers, we would joke about it, letting nervous laughter disguise the unease we all felt. But there was one thing we never joked about, the locked room at the very end of the upstairs hall. It was always there, silent and sealed, like a heartbeat you couldn't hear but somehow knew was pulsing. No one had ever been inside, not even my cousin Tessa. Her parents brushed off our questions with vague answers. It's just storage, or the door sticks. But they never let us near it. The lock itself was old, brass tarnished to green, and it had a peculiar keyhole shaped like an open mouth. As kids, we'd dare each other to touch it, and every time our fingers would recoil as if the metal were too cold to belong to this world. That night, curiosity finally outweighed fear. It was nearly midnight, the kind of hour when sleepovers turn from laughter to secrets. The storm outside gave the house a strange rhythm, rain hammering on the roof, thunder rattling the glass. My friends were sprawled across the floor, but my gaze kept drifting toward the darkened hallway. That door had been taunting me for years, and now, with no adults awake, I couldn't resist. Tessa hesitated when I suggested it. She bit her lip, eyes darting like a guilty child. "We're not supposed to," she whispered. "That's why we should," I said, forcing a grin to mask my own nerves. Max produced a paperclip with a flourish, claiming he'd learned lockpicking on YouTube. The rest of us crowded behind him, our shadows stretching grotesquely in the flashlight beam. When the lock finally clicked, it sounded less like success and more like a warning sigh. The room beyond was wrong. Dust coated every surface, yet nothing seemed abandoned. It was as if someone had simply stepped out mid-breath and never returned. A narrow bed stood neatly made, a faded quilt tucked tight. A wooden dresser gleamed beneath a layer of cobwebs, and a cracked mirror leaned against the wall, reflecting our wide-eyed faces back at us. Even the air felt different. Stale, yes, but with an underlying sweetness, like old perfume that never quite dissipated. On the nightstand sat a single object, a diary, its leather cover warped with age. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the pages brittle and yellow. The first entry was dated 32 years ago and described another sleepover, eerily similar to ours. My throat tightened as I read the words aloud, the hair on my arms prickling. As I flipped the page, fresh ink glistened in a new entry. The handwriting was frantic, jagged. My breath caught as I read the final line, my voice barely audible over the storm. They are reading this right now. Behind us, the door creaked. The creak hushed us into statues. I felt the storm pause as if the house were holding its breath, listening for our next mistake. The diary lay open in my hands, a living thing. Ink bled through the page. Tessa squeezed my elbow, holding me back from the edge of a roof. Max lifted his phone to film, but his hands shook, turning the screen into a wounded strobe. I read backward to make sense of the entries. The writer, Lena, described a night long ago. The quilts, the mirror, the laughter thinning to threads. Then the words shifted from memory to present tense. She wrote that the door was opening, that the rain sounded like footsteps crossing a ceiling. She said the room had a habit of remembering. But what none of us expected was the next sentence forming as I watched. Letters scrawling with no hand. You will touch the mirror. I snatched my fingers away, heart ricocheting. The glass held a faint pallor, as if moonlight had been poured behind it and left to curdle. Our reflections lagged a breath. My swallow arrived late, my blink stitched in afterthought. The surface wasn't smooth. Subtle ripples quivered, like heat off asphalt, distorting a face that looked too much like mine. The diary rasped when I turned a page, and fresh ink answered the movement. Don't let it name you. We needed logic like a lifeline. I told myself about suggestibility, ideomotor effects, damp pages releasing old ink. Max marked time for the video. Jenna tested the hinge with a ruler. Tessa photographed the room for later analysis. But the room didn't wait to be understood. The perfume thickened, sweet and stale, coating my tongue like dust. The air grew heavy, as if gravity had been politely increased. The ceiling ticked. The mattress sighed. I asked Lena a question in my head, a foolish impulse dressed as science. The new line appeared. I hear you. Then another. You hear me because the room uses what you bring. My mouth went dry. If the room was a circuit, we were the current. The diary turned a page without wind, paper whispering like a moth's wing. The mirror brightened. A silhouette formed behind us, a fifth figure the size of a memory, head tilted, patient. Tessa reached for my wrist. Don't let it name you, I repeated, and realized the instruction carried a cost. Name's anchor, name's pull. The figure moved closer in the glass, but not the room, as if depth had been negotiated differently on that side. I tested a hypothesis and stepped left. My reflection delayed, then snapped into place beside the stranger. Its mouth moved once. No sound, only a shape. My name. The diary snapped shut in my hands, a clap like thunder thrown down a hallway. The door slammed with it, windless absolute. Max's phone flickered and died. Darkness rinsed the room, then yielded to a stripe of stormlight under the door. On the cover something wrote from the inside, letters embossing outward, slow as breath. A final line bulged through the leather. They are leaving now. But the knob did not turn. The mirror did. And in its depth, someone who wore my face smiled and lifted a key I came just after midnight, subtle enough that we almost mistook it for the settling of the old lake house. A second followed, heavier, deliberate, like a giant footfall placed precisely above us. Silence stretched, taut and breathless, before the sound came again. A slow, steady rhythm, pacing back and forth along the roof. We froze mid-laugh. Our movie paused on a half-lit frame. The house itself seemed to hold its breath with us, the only noise the faint whistle of wind through the cracked window panes. Jenna was the first to break the silence, nervously laughing. Probably raccoons, she said, though her voice trembled. But raccoons don't walk like that. There was a cadence to it, a weight that felt human. Another step. Louder, closer. The boards beneath our feet vibrated, subtle but undeniable. I moved to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. Outside, the night was a velvet void, moonlight tangled in the bare branches of the trees. I swept my flashlight beam across the shingles. Nothing. The roof gleamed pale and empty, as if daring me to keep looking. Max joined me, his jaw tight. "Could be wind knocking a loose branch," he murmured, though his eyes betrayed disbelief. We both knew it wasn't wind. The sound was too precise. Left, right, pause, turn. The footsteps quickened, circling the house now. One lap, then another, faster. My pulse raced to match the pattern, adrenaline spiking. The pacing grew erratic, almost frantic, like something searching for a way inside. Jenna clutched a blanket to her chest, her face ashen. "We need proof," I said, my voice thin but determined. "If we could capture the vibrations, maybe we could at least understand." Max handed me his phone, and we opened an accelerometer app, laying it flat on the wooden floor. The needle spiked violently with each heavy tread above, the screen flickering like a panicked heartbeat. At first, the pattern matched a single walker. Then, without warning, a second signal appeared. 2 sets of steps, perfectly synchronized. The lines on the graph merged and split like a choreographed dance. My breath caught. "There are more than one," Max whispered. The pacing grew louder, as though the roof itself were sagging under the weight of unseen figures. The rhythm was hypnotic, unnatural, like the march of an army only we could hear. Sweat slicked my palms. Jenna sobbed softly, muffling the sound with her blanket. Desperation clawed at us. We threw open the back door, shining flashlights upward, but the roof remained impossibly empty. Yet the vibrations continued, mocking our senses. It was like listening to footsteps in a recording while standing in a silent room. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick as wet wool. I exhaled shakily, until a new noise slithered through the quiet. A faint, deliberate scratching, not from above but from inside the house itself. Our heads turned in unison toward the attic door. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Whatever had been on the roof wasn't out there anymore. It was here. The scratching sharpened into rhythm, a pencil testing paper, stopping long enough to feel intentional. I told myself to treat the house like a lab, not a legend. Max set the accelerometer to continuous record and slid his phone onto the bottom attic stair. The graph twitched in neat teeth, then rose into a steady sawtooth, as if whatever waited above was measuring us back. Jenna gripped my sleeve. I pressed my ear to the door. Beneath the scrape, something breathed, a papery draw, like pages turning themselves. When I whispered that we were listening, the scratch matched my heartbeat, tap for thud, sinking to a host. I mapped the hall with mugs of water, poor man's seismographs. At each new scrape, ripples flowered in sequence from the attic outward, a choreography of rings. The pattern wasn't random. It moved clockwise, then counter, like a key trying teeth in a lock. My brain, hungry for rules, offered a hypothesis I didn't want. There was more than one set of hands. We killed the lights for a clean read. The phone's LED pulsed and the app built a skyline of tremors. Jenna counted under her breath. Every fourth number, the scratches paused, waiting to be corrected. I thought of metronomes syncing, of heart cells aligning in a dish. "Proof," I whispered, and cracked the door 2 inches. Dust wafted down, tasting of cedar. I slid the phone onto the top step, camera aimed up and mirrored its feed. For a moment, rafters, a bent nail glinting like a tooth. Then the pixels clumped, not one shape but several. Faint depressions in the dust moving in a ring, perfectly spaced, like dancers circling a drain. The scratches migrated to the inner frame. Wood thinned in a pale crescent. Our mugs quivered, rings stacking and collapsing. I gripped the knob and felt it turn with me, not against an eager partner learning the step. The door sighed wider and the temperature dropped like a bulb going out. Inside, the smell of wet shingles and iron. The microphone caught a new sound, delicate and awful. The patter of feet, not on boards, but on the sloped interior of the roof, like rain discovering bones. The graph split, multiplied, then braided into unanimity. A whisper slid along the rafters, thin as wire. It wasn't a word so much as breath-shaping names. I lifted the beam and found prints in the dust. Bare, narrow, dozens. Each toe pointed toward us. The door behind us clicked. I snatched for the handle and missed. The latch settled with a satisfied snick. Scratches answered from both sides at once, impatient now, knuckles drumming. Under my feet the water stilled, then surged toward the stair as if tugged by tide. Something tested the second stair. The app drew it in clean strokes. Pressure. Release, pressure, release. A measured descent matching none of our weights. Wood lifted, settled, lifted. I realized the footsteps hadn't moved from the roof. The roof had moved to meet us. Cold slid across my neck. The LED brightened and a final scratch carved an arc above the latch. Then the pacing thing reached the gap beneath the door and breathed in our light. In the dark, something leaned close enough to hear our thoughts asking what next. The glow of the TV was the only light in the room, painting our faces in shifting shades of blue and red as we sat cross-legged on the carpet, controllers in hand. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing, wind rattling the windows, rain drumming the roof in erratic bursts. It was the perfect night for a horror game marathon. 4 friends, too much caffeine, and the kind of giddy fear that only comes when you know you're safe. Or at least when you think you are. Max was the one who found the game. It didn't have a title screen, just a blank interface and a blinking prompt that read, "Press start to begin." He swore it was a new indie release, buried deep in an online forum, and he downloaded it mostly to impress us. The graphics were eerily photorealistic, almost uncanny, like someone had recreated reality with slightly too much detail. At first, it seemed harmless. The game opened on a single room, a messy living space with blankets on the floor and empty soda cans scattered around. We all laughed because it looked exactly like the room we were sitting in. Even the crooked poster above Tessa's couch was there, down to the tear in the corner. Creepy coincidence, Jenna said, but there was a tightness in her voice. We started exploring the virtual space, moving our digital characters around while joking about how lazy the developers must have been to just copy our setup. But then the game began to respond. When Tessa set her drink down on the coffee table, the TV character did the same, milliseconds later. When Max scratched his nose, his digital counterpart mirrored the motion with perfect precision. We froze. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was replication. Maybe it's some kind of augmented reality thing, Max said quickly, his logical side scrambling for footing. Like it's using the camera on the console. To test it, I deliberately made a random move, hopping to my feet and spinning in a full circle. The game lagged for a beat. And then my avatar spun too. Only in the game, there was someone behind me, just out of focus, a shadowy figure that vanished the moment I blinked. My chest tightened. "Did you see that?" No one answered, but I could feel their fear radiating, thick as smoke. We decided to push it further. Tessa clapped her hands 3 times, fast and sharp. The TV clapped back, but with 4 echoes instead of 3. "This thing isn't copying us," Jenna whispered. "It's predicting." As if on cue, the game world began to shift. The walls in the digital room darkened, warping and stretching like melting wax. A new message appeared on the screen. Level 2, fear mapping initiated. Objects started appearing that shouldn't have been there. A cracked mirror, a locked door, a pile of bones. Each one corresponded to something personal, secret. Things only we would fear. And then the lights in the game went out. On the TV screen, a faint glow remained, a pixelated feed of our real room, showing us sitting in a perfect circle. The camera view was from behind us, the sensation of a lens pinning a butterfly, clinical. On the screen, our backs were hunched like question marks, each of us frozen in that eerie tableau. I held my breath and refused to give the game what it wanted. But what none of us expected was the way the image drifted closer, as if the camera itself were sliding across the floor toward us. Pixels whispered. The storm hushed to listen in the room. We agreed without speaking. I raised my hand slowly. On the screen, my arm lifted a beat ahead of me, a teacher correcting a sluggish student. The prediction made my skin crawl. Max tapped the controller to pause, but the word never appeared. Instead, fresh text crawled up the bottom. Level 3, input override. The room felt suddenly smaller, like a lung exhaling around us. A metronome ticked inside my ribs. To prove there was a camera, I lunged for the console and yanked a strip of painter's tape, slapping it over every lens I knew. In the TV feed, the viewpoint didn't blink. It simply drifted left, past the taped sensors, past the shelf of board games, settling behind us again with patient malice. The keyboard clatter began. Soft, deliberate keystrokes somewhere beyond the ring of our lamps. Not a glitch. Someone or something was typing. Fear is information, I told myself. Map it. We built a crude experiment. Tessa placed 3 coins in a triangle. Jenna whispered a number only to me. Max set his phone to record the soundscape and opened a spectrum analyzer. I closed my eyes and counted down from 10. At 6, the game printed the whispered number. At 4, the coins rolled into a line on screen, though ours hadn't moved. At 1, the analyzer flared. Hidden tones laddered under the keystrokes, frequencies like rungs on a fire escape. The keyboard stopped. The feed zoomed until I could see the subtle weave of Tessa's sweatshirt. On the edge of the frame, a new prompt pulsed. Final level, author. Letters arranged themselves beneath, building sentences I hadn't spoken yet. My thoughts felt like strings being plucked. I tried to think of nothing and discovered how loud nothing can be, a room full of humming. Like a fading lantern, my courage guttered and then steadied. The game spoke in text. Turn around. I didn't. It answered with kindness so sharp it cut. You already did. The TV showed me pivoting. Shoulders tensing, mouth opening, 20 frames ahead of reality. I turned in spite of myself. Behind us, the corner was empty, just a sliver of stormlight and the shine of a dropped spoon. And yet the keystrokes resumed, close enough to feel in my teeth. But what they didn't expect was that we were done obeying. I pulled the plug. The TV died, but the typing continued in the dark, steady as rain on a tin roof. My phone caught a breath behind the couch, then a soft enter key. The TV flashed awake on its own and typed one last line, bright as lightning. Looked down. I lowered my gaze and found a keyboard imprinted in the dust between our circle of knees. No wires, no hands, letters depressing one by one like footprints in fresh snow. The night had been ordinary in the way the best sleepovers are. Cheap pizza, bad movies, and the comfortable chaos of inside jokes echoing through a room lit only by a single, dying lamp. My friends were scattered across the floor like castaways on mismatched blankets, laughter fading into lazy silence. Somewhere outside, crickets sang their static song, the rhythm of a world that felt far away. Around midnight, I pulled out my phone. We'd been taking ridiculous selfies all evening, trying to capture that delirious late-night energy before exhaustion swallowed it. Tessa leaned into frame with exaggerated duck lips. Max made a face like a cartoon villain, and Jenna, forever camera-shy, hid behind a pillow. The flash burst bright and careless, bleaching our tired faces into ghostly masks. When the laughter ebbed, I began scrolling backward through the gallery, mostly to delete the worst of the shots before anyone used them as blackmail later. That's when my thumb froze mid-swipe. It was a photo I didn't remember taking. The image showed all 4 of us asleep, bodies slack and still, blankets pooled around us like driftwood. But we weren't asleep. We were awake right now, in this very moment, and towering above our fragile ring of bodies was a shape. Tall, lean, its head bowed as though listening. The figure was wrong in a way my brain refused to decode, more shadow than flesh, and yet its presence radiated unmistakable intent. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was an old photo, a prank someone had slipped into my phone. But the timestamp glared at me like an accusation. 12:04 a.m. The current time was 12:07 a.m. It had been taken 3 minutes ago. Guys, I whispered, my voice tight, fraying at the edges. Look at this. They crowded around, breaths hitching as the image burned into their retinas. Tessa clapped a hand over her mouth, muffling a scream. Max immediately grabbed his own phone, scanning through his gallery. But there was nothing there, only mine, as if the thing had chosen me. We tore through possibilities with desperate logic. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe the phone was hacked. Maybe it was some kind of glitch. But none of those theories explained the simplest, most terrifying fact. None of us had been sleeping. I deleted the photo with a shaking thumb, the digital image dissolving into nothingness. Relief surged through me, sharp and fleeting. But when I scrolled back, a new photo waited. This time the figure was closer. Its shadow stretched across Jenna's sleeping bag like a reaching hand. My pulse thundered. I deleted it again. Another appeared. Delete another, each one closer than the last, as if the camera's shutter were the beat of a predator's footsteps. Max panicked, grabbing tape to cover the phone's front and back cameras. Tessa flipped the lamp off, plunging the room into darkness, thinking maybe the darkness would hide us. But when I checked again, the photos continued, clearer than before, the light source now coming from somewhere inside the frame itself. And then, without warning, the newest photo showed a hand, long-fingered, unfamiliar, holding my phone. For a second I thought it was a trick of reflection, some loop where the camera captured its own capture. But the hand in the photo wasn't mine. The knuckles were narrow, the nails too clean, and a pale crescent scar marked the thumb. The background was our room, skewed. My stomach turned to glass. The next image blinked into being. The unfamiliar hand had shifted its grip, and comprehension landed with a cold click. It was holding my phone while I held nothing. I tightened my fingers, as if pressure could anchor reality. Max told me to power it down. I did, pressing until the screen blacked. Relief came like cool rain. Then the phone vibrated in my palm and lit itself open to the gallery. New photos stacked like falling cards, each stamped with the present tense. We needed structure before panic ate us. I laid the phone on the coffee table and paced a slow 4-4-4 breath, pulling the others into rhythm. Data first. I set a timer and took no action for 30 seconds. If images still appeared, the input wasn't us. The timer ticked. The gallery advanced by 3 frames, documenting angles of our stillness. Tessa's clenched jaw, Jenna's shaking shoulders, Max's shoelaces untied like spilled string. The hand never showed an arm, only that thumb and palm. To corner the source, we muffled the microphones, buried the phone under a pillow, and ringed it with our other devices. It didn't matter. At the 30-second mark, a new photo arrived. A top-down shot of the pillow itself, the weave of the fabric crisp as frost. My breath fogged the moment. Whatever held the camera didn't need line of sight. It had a map. The next photo changed everything. It showed my lock screen, my own face reflected faintly, and the tiniest reflection in my pupil, a figure where a photographer should be. Not a person exactly. A tall blankness like a silhouette cut from midnight and glued to daylight. When I zoomed, the pixels refused to resolve, sliding off like oil. We tried to trap it with intention. I pictured the hand setting the phone down. I pictured it stepping back. I packed my skull with that single command, the way you pack clay into a crack. The thumb paused. In the next photo, the grip loosened, index finger hovering above the screen like a question. But what none of us expected was the 4th frame. My lock screen replaced by the camera app. Front-facing, our circle framed from above by nothing at all. Out of options. I flipped the phone and took a photo on purpose, aiming the lens at the dark. Click. The new image bloomed. The same tall blankness, now inches away, crowding the edge where my face should be. A second image piled in, then a third, strobing a slow advance. Fear dragged over my skin like wet cloth. I backed toward the doorway, heart stumbling. The last photo shuddered into place. Not the room, not our faces, just the hand again, placing my phone gently on the floor beside my foot. Something tapped my ankle, a small, deliberate knock. I lowered my gaze and the screen brightened with fresh text etched where a caption should be. Will you hold still? Struck without warning, a single blink of the universe, and then darkness. 1 second we were laughing in the living room, half buried in blankets and junk food, the hum of the heater wrapping us in lazy comfort. The next, every light was swallowed, leaving us blind and weightless. The house seemed to exhale, releasing something it had been holding back. For a heartbeat, no one moved. I could hear only the sharp inhale of my friends, the fast shuffle of socks on carpet. My phone's screen cast a weak glow as I fumbled to turn on the flashlight. It's probably just a storm, I said, though my voice wavered. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, thick and smothering, with no moon or streetlights to anchor us. We huddled together instinctively, 4 shadows orbiting a trembling circle of light. Somewhere deeper in the house, a noise stirred, a soft dragging sound, like fabric being pulled across the floor. We froze, straining to hear. It came again, closer this time, followed by a whisper so faint it felt imagined. My pulse leapt. Tessa's hand clamped around my wrist. "Did you hear that?" She breathed. I nodded, throat tight. The darkness had a weight now, a presence. It wasn't just the absence of light. It felt occupied. Then impossibly, music began to play. A child's lullaby, distant and warped, the notes drifting through the hall like they'd traveled across decades to reach us. Jenna whimpered, pressing her face into her knees. Max swore under his breath, muttering about faulty wiring, even though the power was clearly dead. We sat in suffocating silence as the noises ebbed and flowed. Whispers, dragging, the lullaby fading in and out like a bad radio signal. The minutes stretched elastic, reality thinning. My phone battery ticked downward, the beam dimming with each passing second. Just as my fear tipped into panic, the lights blazed back on. We gasped, shielding our eyes. For a moment, relief surged through me, until I saw the room. It was wrong. Not drastically, but subtly, insidiously wrong. The coffee table had shifted a few inches to the left. The curtains hung at uneven angles, though no wind had touched them. A blanket that had been on the floor now rested neatly folded on the couch. It was as if the house had been rearranged by someone who almost, but not quite, understood how we'd left it. Then my gaze swept our little circle, and my heart stuttered. "Someone was missing. Where's Lily?" I blurted, scanning the room. 3 blank faces turned toward me. "Who?" Tessa asked slowly, her tone puzzled rather than alarmed. "Lily." My voice rose. "She was right here. She was laughing when the lights went out." Max shook his head. "There's no one named Lily here. It's just us." Panic clawed at my chest. I spun in frantic circles, searching for proof. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, their calmness more terrifying than the darkness had been. And then, beneath the couch, something white caught my eye. I dropped to my knees and pulled it out. A single sock. Tiny and unmistakably Lily's, patterned with faded stars. The lights flickered once, like a warning. The bulb steadied, and so did my resolve. They could call it hysteria. I knew Lily's laugh. I tucked the sock into my pocket like a passport and began a methodical sweep. Evidence first, fear second. I photographed the room, then walked the hall, narrating timestamps so memory would have rails to run on. The house listened, air still. Small wrongnesses multiplied. A chair angled toward a blank wall. Crescent smears on the mirror, too high for any of us. In the kitchen, a spoon rested where no one had cooked, the air tasting of pennies. The lullaby stayed gone, but each pipe ticked once when I entered, like a polite knock. Tessa hovered at thresholds. Max eyed the breaker box as if rationality could be reset like a switch. I needed a control. I asked them to remain in the living room while I traced Lily's last certain position. The socksmate didn't turn up, but I found a star of lint in the rug and her elastic hair tie wedged in the couch seam where she'd burrowed earlier. Scent is memory's archivist. I leaned in and caught the citrus shampoo she loved. My friends didn't say I was wrong. They said nothing, which somehow hurt worse. But what none of us expected was the hallway light brightening as I passed beneath it, a throat clearing before a confession. The guest room door, ajar all week, now pinched itself to a seam. I pressed my ear to the wood. No lullaby, only an intermittent rasp, like pages turned with gloved fingers. When I opened it, the room was ours and not. Same furniture, new geometry. The bed rotated 90 degrees. The dresser shifted just enough to print a clean rectangle of dust on the wall. On the nightstand layup, I cupped the marble. It was warm. The warmth felt borrowed. Faint scuffs led toward the closet. Inside, the coats made a man-shaped blur. I parted them and found not drywall, but an inset panel the size of a crawlspace hatch. Fresh screws bit the paint. Someone had covered something quickly, carelessly. The house pressed in until even my breath sounded dubbed. Arriving a fraction late, I knocked. A knock answered. Too light for an adult, too certain for a pipe. 3 beats, a pause, then 2, the rhythm Lily drummed on tabletops when she was bored. Every hair on my arms lifted like grass and static. Max fetched a screwdriver, hands steady only while working. We backed out the screws one by one until the panel slackened. On the other side came a small exhale, like a room relieved to be remembered. I slid my fingers under the lip and lifted. The lights dimmed to amber and held. From the slit breathed dust and laundry soap, and the faintest thread of lullaby, as if someone hummed with a closed mouth. I whispered Lily's name into the seam. Something whispered mine back in Lily's cadence, and then another voice, lower and patient, repeated it as if teaching a child to speak. I froze. Hand on the panel, the sock in my pocket heating like a coin. Somewhere inside, something tapped twice, inviting. And behind me, furniture shifted again, inch by inch, like a chessboard setting itself for the next move. Subscribe, if you dare.